we're back in the studio. Why? Because you loved our last video on problems that you can find with a SPC flooring. Well, we're back today with Grant Neve from Wanabiwood looking at LVT.
Always good to be back in Cape Town, looking at problems once again, but let's be assured that this is not an everyday occurrence, but we're here to make sure it doesn't become one.
Yeah. These are problems we find across multiple suppliers, multiple retailers, installers. These are just generic problems that we encounter, and we just want to bring them to your attention. These are simple mistakes that can be avoided.
I think with the SPC video that we did earlier this year, if you follow the rule book, we're not going to get problems. But it's when you decide to go off that tract and break the rule book, then we're back to square one and we get the problems like you can see behind us now.
Well, this is absolutely just terrible. I can imagine the installer, the retailer, the homeowner, everybody's crying because this floor can't be saved. And what's going on here, Grant?
Well, obviously they thought it was child's play by the fact that there's toys in the background. But my first impression on that would be moisture, which is the biggest enemy of any LVT. And it's not the LVT that's got the problem with the moisture. It's actually the adhesive that's below it that breaks down and causes the problem.
Yeah. So obviously this is trying to vent, or what is actually causing those headers to peak?
Well, I think from my opinion, looking at this before we've actually pulled a board up, I would suggest that the moisture in this particular installation was very high.
Yeah.
The adhesive is emulsified below the floor. The floor wants to expand, and it just pops up like that.
Yeah. So the adhesive has lost its ability to hold the plank in place, and it's just releasing. And those planks, are they expanding slightly, or are they just venting?
Well, in my opinion, they expand, but they can't expand over the full length, so then they pop up.
Yeah,
and that's what I would call. You call it venting, I call it tomato, you call it tomato, but whatever. It's exactly the same principle. The glue can physically not hold the natural expansion and contraction of the board, and therefore we get these problems.
Yeah. I've also seen a very similar result when people have been putting product down and they haven't actually acclimated the product correctly. And it's actually been warming up in the environment. You start in the morning and then during the day, the venue gets warmer. And these planks are actually expanding while that glue is still wet.
Exactly.
And I've had planks that have actually shot right past each other by up to 2 millimeters, but it's 2 on each plank. So 4 millimeters in total.
Exactly.
It looks horrendous.
And because your expansion is greater over the longer length of the plank, that's where you always see the peaking on the end joints. You very seldom see it on the long joints, but I have seen it as well.
Yeah. So I think we've got quite a few photographs to go and review here today, but I think one of the predominant issues is moisture.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, we stress time and time again, if you cannot rule out moisture in a ground floor slab, then unfortunately you need to install a moisture barrier.
Absolutely. But a lot of the time it's out of the costing. So people are always very competitive. A lot of installers don't even have a moisture barrier and they take chances.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, 90% of the time you will get away with it, but it won't be the bedroom that ever fails. It'll always be that big job, and that can actually break the companies.
It breaks the companies, it breaks the installers, and then unfortunately they go and they close down the name that they had yesterday and the new name tomorrow, and who loses? The consumer.
Exactly. And it's just follow a simple step. If you don't want to put the moisture barrier on your full body of the quote, put it there as a recommendation or as an approved guideline from the manufacturer that we seriously recommend a moisture barrier on a ground floor slab. Put it as a separate item, but also put there that disclaimer to say that if you do not fit this moisture barrier, there could be a potential problem going forward that is not covered by the warranty.
That's a really cool idea. And, just while we're talking about moisture, when the guys are checking for a moisture barrier, for moisture in the slab with their non-invasive moisture meters, that is giving you an indicative reading of the slab for the top 25 millimeters. It's not giving you an idea of what is actually down at like 80 mil, 100 mil. And we need to be careful because a lot of the times, especially in South Africa, we have our open, lovely, hot, sunny venues. And the surface, because of the temperature and the airflow, the surface is dry and might be within spec, but there's a lot more moisture further down. So ultimately, my number one recommendation is that you actually drill 2 holes and you get the moisture meter with the 2 isolated probes and you check at least 80 mil down. Because I know that when you encapsulate or you put a moisture barrier on top of that slab, if there is any moisture below, it's actually going to equalize across the entire volume, and that moisture is going to come up and impact your adhesive.
I think, I couldn't agree with you more. And that is the problem is, have you got your moisture meter? It's the most basic of tools to go and test the floor with. That said, sometimes even the Romus meters, the Tramex, are not that accurate on the surface, as Barry was saying. If you've got an open slab, sometimes you can't detect moisture. If that slab's been open for 6 months, a year, or a new build, you won't detect the moisture because it's evaporating into the atmosphere. It's only when you seal that moisture in with the vinyl that you get a problem.
And that's why, like, to put a moisture barrier down as a standard is your safeguard. It safeguards the client's investment. It safeguards your reputation.
100%. For the sake of, I don't know, offhand what the moisture barriers are, 50, 60 rand a square meter plus minus.
Yeah, plus labor.
It's a good safeguard, and it can cost you far more when the job goes wrong than that 50, 60 rand in the first instance.
I know, but the guys struggle when it's a price, a slippery slope to the bottom when it comes to pricing these projects. But every man or installer to their own, just understand your installs are at risk. Let's get into the next photograph.
Yeah, let's go.
So we're looking at our next image where you can see there's a moisture reading of 5.1% on the Romus. And what were the symptoms on this site?
Again, we had peaking of the joints.
Yeah.
So I did do a moisture test on top. And normally I can see if it's at 3.5 on top of the vinyl, I know I'm going to find something lying underneath.
Yeah, I just want to put a proviso in. Obviously, it's not giving you a moisture reading, it's giving you a moisture indication. And that you use as your indicator to explore further.
Exactly. So we pulled the floor up, and as you can see, in this particular instance, there was also a lack of adhesive used, which didn't really contribute to the problem much. But yeah, we can see. Actually, no, it did contribute a hell of a lot to the problem.
Totally.
So we pulled the board up, which obviously came away very, very easily. There was no transfer from the floor to the back of the board. And when I put the moisture meter down, you can see at 5.1 is just way, way out of specification. There is no way an adhesive is going to work in that situation. Because we have to understand that most adhesives are acrylic water-based products. They are not waterproof adhesives, although the LVT itself shouldn't be affected by the moisture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the number one rule that you would use here is that, if you're doing 100 square meters and you're using the right notch trowel, there will be a specific volume of glue that you should be using for that area. And if your installers are coming back with excess glue left over, you know that you haven't used the right volume. Manage your trowels, make sure they're not worn out, and make sure that you're depositing the correct volumes of glue per square meter over one contract into the next. This is a key issue that we find all too often.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is a trowel is going to cost you 120, 150 rand at a time.
Yeah.
But if you let it wear out, then it's going to cost you a lot more. So rather, probably every 1,000 square meters plus minus, I would replace the trowel without a doubt, or check the notches at the very least, and don't go there with a hacksaw and recut them. That's not the correct way.
It doesn't work. I understand we're trying to save bucks, but that's going to cost you a pretty penny.
And we can see by the notches on the trowel marks left on the floor, as a typical example here, we can see that the notch rate was correct. We can see that there was a good spread, but unfortunately, once again, moisture had caused this installation to foul. So we can see from this picture, although the notches are correct, that there's issues there where moisture is eaten into the adhesive. It's called emulsification, and then we've had a problem with the bond to the back of the product.
Yeah, totally. Wow, here's an image where there is actually I don't know, what's that, 5%, 3% adhesive on the back of the plank?
Did they have a trowel perhaps? Perhaps they didn't have a trowel. Maybe it was a piece of Berber point.
Or they were pushing the plank into dry adhesive. Yeah. They weren't managing the flash-off time.
So when we go out and look at an installation and we fail it due to the installer, we can see here clearly that there has been no transfer. Now, no transfer means either the notch was too small, or as Barry's just pointed out, the adhesive had flashed over too much, or it wasn't even rollered and just banged in with a rubber mallet. You can see a nice little splodge on the right side there where maybe they hit it with a rubber mallet rather than a roller. So yeah, there was definitely no transfer on this particular product.
I think what we need to pay attention to a lot more often is that when we are installing these LVTs, we need to make sure that the glue is at the right flash-off point when we're actually bedding it in. all too often I visit job sites for various reasons, and I see that these guys are applying or spreading out way too much adhesive for the timeline on when they're actually going to get to that stage of the installation. And they're not rollering the floor very soon thereafter. Sometimes they don't even have a roller on site. They say, no, we'll come back tomorrow. That's way too late. You've got to be rolling that floor while that adhesive is still receptive. And that's within that very narrow window. So you are installing an area, you're rollering an area. You install another area, roll another area.
I couldn't agree with you more. And we see it more and more often. It's that need to get the job done quickly. So they think, oh, let's spread a bigger area. Then we'll be able to fit more flooring more quickly. But it doesn't work like that. Every adhesive manufacturer's got an open time. Some are basically laying straight away on the wet sets.
Yeah.
And then you've got other products that you need an open time of maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the atmospheric conditions. It could be too hot. It could be too cold. It could be very humid. They will all affect the flash-off period of all the adhesives.
We did that other video with PK. We had the 2Me touch test. And that's when she was demonstrating that she actually touches the adhesive. And when it gets the right tackiness, she knows it's receptive for the LVT. It's a very narrow window that the adhesive will receive that plank appropriately. And that's the bond that holds everything together. So please pay attention, guys.
I think the touch test is easily described as looking for legs, basically. So when you put your finger into the adhesive, if you pull it up and you've got stringy parts of the adhesive left, as we call it legs, then that's probably the right time to lay in if it's a flash-off product.
So here's our next image where, wow, the plank that you pulled up actually pulled up the screed with it.
Exactly. And there's several reasons for being able to pull the screed away. Obviously, the obvious one is primer or bonding liquid or whatever they choose to use.
Which absolutely essential in ensuring that your screed has the strongest mechanical lock to whatever your original substrate is. And if you're not prepping that substrate appropriately in clearing off contaminants or grinding back debris or old adhesive, this is exactly what happens.
Exactly. It's a little bit off the subject, but your bonding liquid or primer not only creates a bond between the screed and the floor, it allows the screed to flow better as well. Your flow rate will be extended if you do proper primer. It stops the water from your screed soaking into the subfloor as well, which we can see by little tiny air bubbles.
Correct.
So we know if it's not, if they haven't used primer or bonding liquid. But in this case as well, there could have been a case of overwetting of the screed. So your solids have sunk, because if you look at the picture there, it's very, very fine on the top. And I suspect that the solids had sunk also, giving a very, very fine powdery mixture on the top.
Okay, so obviously from the photograph we can see so much, but what we've also encountered is where people are using too much liquid in their self-leveling compound mixture. And this is where you actually have splitting of the various compounds, and then this can occur as well. Obviously, every site is different, and this is where we really dive deep on a physical job site or physical inspection to see the actual grains of product and how they are potentially separating.
Look, I think we've obviously gone off a little bit the subject of how LVTs are working and how they're not and why they're failing, but it's a whole contributing factor. So just because the LVT's failed, it doesn't mean to say it's a product failure. It could be the screed, it could be the adhesive, it could be the bonding liquid, it could be moisture. It's everything that goes below the floor. So when we try and do an inspection now, we try and insist that we've got the adhesive guy there, that we've got the screed guy there, because the responsibility for these things shouldn't just fall on the importer of the vinyl, because there's several key elements that go into the whole installation process.
Absolutely, Grant. I find it's quite often that a lot of the product that's been brought into the South African market or any market, it's quite well established and it has a reputation as such. And generally, the products are really good. And what we find is that the installers don't necessarily understand the layered process of the substrate assessment, preparation, and then the application of the products leading up to the final LVT. And that's where we find the majority of failures. It's not very often that I actually find that we've got a product problem with LVT.
Exactly. And I think most of the importers, reputable importers in the country will back us up on this statement that it's probably 99% of the time is not product failure.
Yeah.
It's what's gone before it in many, many, many cases.
All right, right, here's another photograph where we're seeing a little bit of gapping happening on the headers where the planks are pulling apart. So basically, because we have vinyl, which, as we mentioned earlier, is thermo-responsive. If you don't control that job site when you are busy installing the stuff, that the planks are going to be moving in the wet adhesive, and that compromises that glue bond. So what happens is that we need to acclimate and control the job site during the time that we're installing it, and for the time that adhesive needs to get to 100% full strength, so the full curing time. So if we've got sun or a heat source bearing down on the floor, like a north-facing home, and now the sun is pouring in through a window or whatever, that is going to have a little hot spot. And that hot spot is going to cause the planks to grow, causing it to impede the adhesive strength, which will display at a later date. It could display as slightly pushing headers, or it can also display as little contracting where the headers pull apart. What we need to do here is we need to brown paper up or block that sunlight from hitting the floor. The entire floor must be as even a temperature as possible. And hopefully you're acclimating your product on site for 48 hours beforehand, because otherwise it's also moving just because it's trying to acclimate to the new venue site.
Yeah, and you can just see it running out as you're doing the installations. The floor gets hotter and hotter. If it hasn't been acclimatized, you end up with massive problems. Yeah. And not only that, if you spread glue and you've got direct sunlight on it, that glue's going to flash in an instant. So you've also got problems.
Site control is it's an opportunity to show that you're an absolute professional. Go and get some brown paper, branded up with your business logo or something. Really take it as an opportunity. Take it as an opportunity to upsell when you are presenting your product. And when you are mentioning this to your client, they're going to go, oh, but the other installer didn't mention this. Oh, you're a professional, aren't you?
So I think we need to cut to the chase and let's just back up the basics. Rule number 1 is a moisture barrier. Rule number 2 is a good quality screed. Rule number 3, correct notch on the trowel. Rule number 4,
site acclimation and making sure that you are preventing any hot spots hitting the floor while you're installing. This is absolutely mission critical. And if you have any doubt about whether the substrate is 100% dry and within spec, put a probe moisture meter down. Really just double check your site conditions, because moisture is a real LVT killer.
And probably the most important thing is roller, roller, roller.
Roller at the right time and period. And finally, subscribe, hit the bell. You know what you need to do. Thank you, Grant. Thank you for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, buddy. Always a pleasure.
Till
Thank
next
you.
time.
Definitely.